Mesa, Arizona. The summer of 2008. Picture a comfortable suburban home on a quiet street. Inside lives a young man named Travis Alexander. He's 30 years old, charismatic, ambitious, a motivational speaker and salesman who built himself up from a difficult childhood and now stands in front of rooms full of people, teaching them how to chase the life they want. He's deeply involved in his faith. He's surrounded by friends. To everyone who knows him, Travis is the picture of someone going places. And then, one day, he simply goes quiet. His phone stops answering. Messages pile up unread. Friends who talk to him constantly suddenly can't reach him at all. Days pass. The silence stretches longer than anyone can explain, and a small knot of worry begins to tighten in the people who care about him. Eventually, a group of those friends drives to his house. They let themselves in, and what they discover there will turn a private tragedy into one of the most closely watched cases in modern American memory. But here's what makes this case different from so many others. This wasn't a stranger in the dark. This wasn't a random act by someone Travis had never met. The danger, it would turn out, had come from inside his own life, from someone he had trusted, someone he had been close to, someone who would soon look investigators directly in the eye and calmly tell them she had nothing to do with any of it. And that was only the first version of her story, because over the months that followed, the woman at the center of this case would tell not one explanation, but three, each one completely different, each one delivered with total conviction. First, she wasn't there. Then, masked intruders had done it. Then, finally, an entirely new story altogether. This is a case about deception, about manipulation, about how someone can present one face to the world, soft-spoken, ordinary, even sympathetic, while the truth underneath looks nothing like the surface. So before we go any further, sit with the question at the heart of everything that follows. How do you recognize manipulation when it's wearing the face of someone who says they care about you? And how do investigators separate the truth from a story told by someone who can change that story completely and calmly, again and again? Let's find out. Section 2. Background. To understand this case, we have to understand two people and the relationship that formed between them. The woman at the center of it was Jodi Arias. She was born in 1980 in Salinas, California. By her own later accounts, her childhood was difficult, and she described tensions and conflict at home. Now, as always, we have to be careful here. Much of what's known about her early life comes from her own statements, and as this case would prove again and again, her statements were not always reliable. So we hold that background lightly. A hard childhood is something many people survive without ever harming anyone. It's context. It is never an excuse. What we can say more clearly is this. As a young adult, Jodi Arias was bright, artistic, and capable of being warm and engaging. People who met her often found her pleasant, even gentle. And that ordinary, unthreatening surface matters, because it's a thread that runs through this entire story. Then, in September of 2006, her path crossed with Travis Alexander's. They met at a work conference in Las Vegas. Travis was magnetic, confident, funny, ambitious, deeply committed to his faith and his goals. The connection between them was immediate. Travis was a devoted member of his church, and before long, Jodi began exploring that faith too. She converted. For a while, on the surface, it looked like a genuine, hopeful connection between two people moving in the same direction. They began dating in early 2007. But the relationship that followed was not the simple story it first appeared to be. It ran hot and cold. They broke up after just a few months, and yet they didn't really separate. The connection continued, on and off, tangled and intense, well after the official relationship had ended. And as it went on, friends of Travis began to notice things that troubled them. Patterns of behavior that felt less like affection and more like fixation. This is where the psychological picture starts to take shape. Because the most important warning signs in this case weren't dramatic, sudden events. They were patterns, quiet, escalating, easy to explain away one at a time. Possessiveness framed as devotion, persistence framed as love. And that's the lesson worth carrying into everything that follows. The early signs of an unhealthy, controlling dynamic rarely announce themselves as danger. They often look, at first, like someone simply caring a little too much. Learning to tell the difference between care and control is one of the most valuable things a case like this can teach us. Section 3. Psychology Break 1. Let's slow down and talk about the psychology, because this case offers an unusually clear window into a few patterns worth understanding. The first concept is one we touched on already: the difference between care and control. In a healthy relationship, affection gives the other person room to breathe. It respects boundaries, distance, and the word no. Controlling behavior does the opposite. It tightens. It monitors. It treats the other person less like a partner and more like a possession. And crucially, it often disguises itself as love, which is exactly what makes it so hard to recognize from the inside. The second concept is fixation. There's a meaningful line between missing someone and being unable to let them go. When a relationship ends and one person simply cannot accept it, when they keep inserting themselves into the other person's life, tracking what they're doing, refusing to release the connection, that's not ordinary heartbreak. That's a warning sign. And in this case, friends observed exactly this kind of behavior in the months before the tragedy. The third, and maybe the most important for this case, is deception. Some people lie to escape trouble in the moment, but there's a different, more striking pattern: the ability to construct entire alternate realities and present them with complete, calm conviction. Not a nervous, fumbling lie, but a confident, detailed, sustained one. This case would become almost a textbook example of that ability. A person telling investigators completely contradictory stories, each delivered without visible distress. Here's a simple way to think about it. Most of us have a kind of internal friction when we lie. Our heart rate climbs. We hesitate. The discomfort shows. But for some individuals, that friction seems remarkably low. They can say something untrue as smoothly as something true. And when you're dealing with a person like that, the normal human instinct, "She seems sincere, so she must be telling the truth," stops being reliable. Sincerity becomes a performance, not a signal. This connects directly to traits psychologists associate with manipulation: a willingness to reshape the truth to fit the moment, a focus on managing how others perceive you, and a striking calm under circumstances that would shake most people. Key takeaway: sincerity is not proof of honesty. A person can appear calm, warm, and completely believable while saying something that isn't true. The real test isn't how convincing someone sounds, it's whether their story holds up against the facts. When emotions and evidence point in different directions, follow the evidence. The danger in this case was never loud or obvious. It hid behind an ordinary, sympathetic surface, and that's precisely why it's worth studying. Section 4. The first signs. Looking back, the warning signs were there. The problem, as it so often is, was that each one, on its own, could be explained away. It's only when you line them up that the pattern becomes visible. After Travis and Jodi's official relationship ended in mid-2007, the connection didn't cleanly end. And as the months passed, the people around Travis started noticing behavior that didn't sit right with them. There were reports of Jodi showing up unexpectedly, of her seeming to know things about Travis's life and whereabouts that she shouldn't easily have known. Friends would later describe a sense that she was monitoring him, paying a kind of attention that went beyond a former partner who simply hadn't moved on. To some of them, it felt less like lingering affection and more like surveillance. Now, think about how each of these moments would have looked in isolation. An ex who shows up where you are? Awkward maybe, but not alarming. An ex who seems to know what you've been doing. Uncomfortable but easy to rationalize. A friend who mentions feeling watched. Easy to wave off as oversensitivity. Individually, none of these things screams danger. But that's exactly the trap. Patterns of control and fixation almost never arrive as a single, obvious red flag. They arrive as a series of small moments, each one just plausible enough to dismiss. And the people living through them, including Travis himself, often downplay their own discomfort because no single incident feels serious enough to act on. There's another layer here too. Travis confided some of his concerns to friends, but the full picture wasn't shared widely or clearly understood by everyone around him. The worry was scattered across different people, different conversations. No one was holding all the pieces at once. And so no complete picture ever formed until it was too late. This is one of the quiet tragedies that repeats across so many cases. The warning signs are rarely invisible. They're just fragmented, spread across different friends, different moments, different half-conversations. One person sees this, another person hears that, but nobody assembles the whole shape. And that's the educational bridge into what comes next. When it comes to controlling or fixated behavior, the signs matter most when they're connected. A single odd moment is easy to excuse, but when several people are quietly uneasy about the same person, that unease deserves to be taken seriously, shared, compared, and looked at as a whole. Communities, friend groups, and families stay safest not when they spot one dramatic sign, but when they're willing to connect the small ones. Section 5. The Case Pattern. In early June of 2008, Travis Alexander's friends hadn't heard from him in days. For someone as connected and communicative as Travis, that silence was deeply out of character. The worry built until a group of them went to his Mesa home to check on him. There they made the discovery that would launch everything that followed. Travis had become a victim of a violent attack inside his own home. He was 30 years old. The community's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Travis was well loved by his church, his friends, his colleagues, his family. People couldn't comprehend how someone so full of life and ambition could be gone, and gone so suddenly. The grief was enormous, and almost as quickly, so were the questions. Investigators arriving at the scene faced a situation that was, at first, difficult to read. But the crime scene held physical evidence, and that evidence would become the backbone of the entire case. Among the most significant discoveries was a digital camera. It had been damaged, and an attempt had been made to erase what was on it. But investigators were able to recover images from it, and those recovered images would place a specific person inside that home during the critical window of time. That person was Jodi Arias. Here's where the psychology of the case comes sharply into focus. Because when investigators first approached Jodi, she did not behave like someone caught. She was calm, composed, and she flatly denied having been anywhere near Travis's home. Her first story was simple. She wasn't there, she had nothing to do with it. But the evidence said otherwise. And as it began to mount, as it became undeniable that she had in fact been present, her story didn't collapse. It transformed. She produced a second version of events, that she had been there, but that masked intruders had broken in, attacked Travis, and let her escape. A dramatic, detailed account delivered with the same composure as the denial that came before it. And then, eventually, that story would change too. Step back and look at the pattern, because this is the heart of what makes the case so instructive. This wasn't a single panicked lie. It was a sequence of complete, internally detailed narratives, each one abandoned only when the evidence made it impossible to maintain, and each one replaced by the next without visible distress. The story bent to fit whatever the facts forced it to accommodate. This is what manipulation can look like under pressure. Not a confession when cornered, but a revision. A new version, equally confident, that absorbs the new facts and keeps going. And it's why physical evidence mattered so much here. Because you cannot cross-examine a feeling, and you cannot trust a story told by someone who can change it at will. The recovered images, the forensic findings, the timeline, these were the fixed points that no amount of retelling could move. In a case defined by shifting words, the evidence was the one thing that stayed still. That contrast between an unshakable surface of calm and an endlessly shifting account underneath is exactly why this case became a landmark study in deception. Section 6. Psychology Break 2. So we have to ask the question this case keeps circling back to. What allows a person to behave this way, to deny, to invent, to revise, all while staying so composed? There's no single tidy answer, and it's important to be honest about that. But the patterns in this case point toward a few psychological ideas worth understanding. The first is compartmentalization, the ability to wall off parts of your own experience so completely that they don't seem to touch each other. Most people, after being involved in something traumatic, carry visible signs of it: distress, guilt, the strain of holding a secret. But some individuals appear able to seal those things away and present a surface that looks untouched. It's not that the events didn't happen, it's that the person seems able to keep them in a separate room of the mind, behind a door that stays closed, even under direct questioning. The second idea is impression management taken to an extreme. All of us, to some degree, care how we're perceived. We put our best foot forward. But for some people, controlling the narrative isn't just a habit, it's the central project. The goal becomes shaping what other people believe, almost regardless of what's true. And when the facts threaten that narrative, the response isn't to surrender it. It's to rebuild it in a new shape. The third is the role of self-justification. People who construct elaborate alternate stories often aren't simply lying in a cold, calculated way. Many appear on some level to commit to their own version, to inhabit it. That's part of what makes the calm so convincing. It's hard to look nervous about a story you've persuaded yourself to stand behind. Put those together, and you get a person who can sit across from an investigator, look composed, and deliver an account that the evidence will later contradict, without the visible cracks we instinctively look for. Key takeaway: the people hardest to read are often the ones most invested in controlling how they're seen. When someone's calm seems strangely out of step with the seriousness of the situation, that mismatch itself is worth noticing. Don't measure truth by how composed or sincere a person appears. Measure it against what can actually be verified. The lesson of this case isn't that everyone is hiding something, It's that confidence and composure are not the same as honesty, and the difference can matter enormously. Section 7. The investigation. What makes this case so valuable as a study isn't just the psychology of the person at its center. It's how methodically investigators worked to separate truth from story, and how much that work depended on evidence rather than impressions. It started at the scene. When investigators examined Travis's home, they approached it the way good investigators always do, assuming nothing, documenting everything. And the single most important breakthrough came from a piece of technology that almost didn't survive. A digital camera was recovered from the scene. It had been damaged, and someone had attempted to delete its contents. Even, investigators determined, run it through a washing machine in an apparent effort to destroy it. But here's the thing about digital evidence. Deleting a file and truly erasing it are not the same. Forensic specialists were able to recover images from that camera, and those images were extraordinary. They captured a sequence of moments inside the home during the exact window when the attack occurred, and they placed Jodi Arias there, contradicting her very first claim that she had never been present at all. That single piece of recovered digital evidence reframed everything. The denial was no longer sustainable. But investigators didn't stop there, and this is an important lesson in itself. One piece of evidence, however powerful, is strengthened when it's corroborated. So they built outward. They examined phone records and digital communications, reconstructing the timeline of contact between Jodi and Travis. They traced her movements, a long road trip, rental car records, gas purchases, the physical trail a person leaves when they travel across state lines. Each of these threads could be checked against her shifting accounts. And again, the physical and digital record told a more consistent story than her words did. This is the quiet power of a careful investigation. A person can change their narrative. They cannot retroactively change a gas station receipt, a phone log, a rental record, or a recovered photograph. Those things sit fixed in time. And when you gather enough of them, they form a framework that no amount of retelling can bend. There's something worth pausing on here. Notice that the case wasn't cracked by a dramatic confession or a single flash of insight. It was built, patiently, piece by piece, by people who refused to simply accept the version they were told, and who kept testing each claim against verifiable fact. When the story changed, the evidence didn't. And that's the broader lesson about investigation and about protecting communities. Forensic evidence and digital records have become some of the most powerful tools we have, precisely because they don't bend to persuasion. But they only matter when investigators are thorough enough to preserve them, recover them, and follow where they lead. Persistence and discipline, the willingness to keep verifying rather than assuming, are what turn a confusing scene into a clear account. In a case built on shifting words, it was the steady accumulation of unmovable facts that finally made the truth impossible to deny. Section 8. The capture or breakthrough. The turning point in this case didn't come from a chase or a dramatic standoff. It came from the slow, undeniable weight of evidence closing the space around a story that could no longer hold. Once the recovered images placed Jodi Arias inside Travis's home, the investigation moved quickly. Within weeks of the discovery, she was located in California and taken into custody. And here again, the case offers a striking psychological portrait, because her response to being arrested was, by many accounts, remarkably composed. This was not a person falling apart. This was someone who appeared, outwardly, almost calm. And that composure extended into something that genuinely surprised people. While in custody, Jodi Arias did not retreat into silence. She spoke to investigators and later extensively to the media. She gave interviews. She made statements. At one point, she famously claimed that no jury would ever convict her, expressing a confidence that struck many observers as bizarre given the circumstances. She even maintained for a long time the version of events involving masked intruders, the second of her stories, defending it publicly and in detail. This willingness to keep talking, to keep performing a version of events, became part of what made the case so widely followed. Most people facing serious accusations say as little as possible. Jodi Arias did the opposite. She seemed almost to believe she could manage the narrative all the way through, that the right words, delivered with enough conviction, could outweigh the physical evidence stacking up against her. But that's the thing the breakthrough revealed so clearly. The evidence didn't care how confident she sounded. The recovered photographs, the forensic findings, the digital trail, none of it could be talked away. And as the case moved toward trial, her second story, The Intruders, would eventually become impossible to maintain. A third version was coming. What finally exposed the pattern here wasn't a single moment of collapse. It was the simple, grinding reality that a story can only be revised so many times before the revisions themselves become the evidence. Each new version, offered with the same calm certainty as the last, revealed something the calm itself had been hiding. And the community that had loved Travis watched all of it, holding on to the memory of who he was, as the truth of what happened to him slowly, finally, came into focus. Section 9. The Trial and Outcome. The trial of Jodi Arias began in early 2013, nearly 5 years after Travis Alexander lost his life. And it became one of the most closely watched courtroom proceedings of its era, broadcast, dissected, and followed by millions. But beneath the spectacle, the trial was really about one fundamental question: which version of the truth would stand? By the time the case reached court, Jodi Arias had arrived at her third and final account. Gone was the denial. Gone were the masked intruders. In their place was an entirely new story, that she had been present and that what happened was the result of self-defense. It was a dramatic reversal from everything she had said before, and that, in a sense, was the prosecution's most powerful argument without their having to say a word. A person who has told 3 completely different stories has, by definition, not told the truth at least twice. The prosecution's theory rested on the evidence we've discussed: the recovered photographs, the forensic findings, the timeline, the physical trail. They argued that the case pattern reflected planning and fixation, not a spontaneous act of self-protection. The defense, by contrast, built its case around her final narrative, presenting her account of the relationship and arguing that her actions, however tragic, arose from fear. The jury had to weigh credibility against evidence, and this is where the long history of shifting stories became decisive. When a person's words have changed so completely, so many times, those words lose their power to persuade, and the fixed, verifiable evidence becomes the thing that carries the most weight. In May of 2013, the jury found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing phase that followed was unusually complicated. The jury that convicted her could not initially reach a unanimous decision on her sentence, and the penalty phase had to be revisited. Ultimately, in 2015, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The long legal saga had finally reached its conclusion. There's a justice system lesson worth drawing out here. The process was slow. It was at times frustrating and imperfect, but it was also careful, methodical about evidence, deliberate about credibility, and ultimately anchored in verifiable fact rather than performance. The system didn't reward the most confident storyteller. It tested the stories against the evidence and let the evidence decide. That's exactly what it's designed to do. And through all of it, Travis Alexander's family and friends carried the memory of who he truly was. Not as a headline, but as a person who mattered deeply to the people who knew him. Section 10. Final Psychology Analysis. So what does this case ultimately teach us? It would be easy to remember it for the spectacle that surrounded the trial, but the real value is in what it reveals about human behavior and about the things that can hide behind an ordinary sympathetic surface. The first lesson is about the limits of sincerity. We are wired as humans to trust people who seem calm, warm, and believable. We take composure as a sign of honesty, but this case is a stark reminder that those things can be completely disconnected. A person can deny, invent, and revise, telling three entirely different stories while never losing their composure. Sincerity is a feeling we get about someone. It is not evidence, and when the two diverge, the feeling is the thing to be suspicious of. The second lesson is about patterns versus moments. The warning signs in this case, the fixation, the difficulty letting go, the sense that someone was being monitored, were rarely dramatic on their own. They were small, fragmented, easy to dismiss one at a time. The danger only became visible in hindsight when the pieces were finally connected. That's true of so many situations involving control and fixation. The single sign is easy to excuse. The pattern is the truth. The third lesson is about the power of evidence. In a case defined by shifting words, it was the unmovable facts, a recovered photograph, a phone record, a physical trail that ultimately held. Words can be revised endlessly. Evidence cannot. And that's why careful, disciplined investigation and the preservation of evidence matter so much. They are how truth survives contact with someone determined to obscure it. So let's make those takeaways simple and clear. 1. Sincerity is not proof of honesty. A person can be calm, warm, and entirely convincing while telling you something that isn't true. 2. Warning signs matter most when they form a pattern. A single odd moment is easy to explain away, but when several people quietly sense the same thing, that deserves attention. 3. Evidence outlasts persuasion. Words can change again and again. Verifiable facts stay fixed, and in the end, they're what reveal the truth. This case is remembered by many for the drama of the courtroom, but the deeper story is a quiet one about human behavior, about how manipulation can hide behind composure, how warning signs hide in fragments, and how patient investigation can cut through even the most confident deception. Understanding that doesn't make us cynical. It makes us more thoughtful, more observant, and better able to tell the difference between how something feels and what is actually true. If this case helped you understand criminal psychology, warning signs, offender behavior, or how investigations work, consider subscribing to Criminal Psychology Files for more educational case studies. Because the more we understand about how deception works and how it's ultimately exposed, the better prepared all of us are to see clearly when it matters most.